many of you probably know Bob Grams, and we'll just let him start telling stories, I guess. That's it. You're on. It's as good as it's gonna get.
I hope this many show up at my funeral. Well, unfortunately, I'm the guy that has to tell the story because all the people that really made the history, and I think some of you have noticed as you came in, they're on the wall there. And so I'll tell the story as best as I can tell it, reminiscing from my dad, the Senator Bill. And so I've got some things I'll read, and then Richard, I think, is going to show a little slideshow when we're finished. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I want to thank my wife and my granddaughter from joining us here today. Linda has, just like her Grams, there's only two things I do. I go to bed and I work. And she lets me know all the time. Welcome to High Noon. Sometime back, I was asked, I think, by Ross Lamphere to give a talk, and quite a few years ago, Dodie Lee, who really started History at High Noon, asked me to speak about the Grams family at the old Bear Butte Bank, and I did, and I found a lot of the notes from there, cleaned up a few things. Since I was born in 1950, a baby boomer, I didn't know my great-grandfather, William. He died in 1937. But I knew of him, and I knew of his German heritage. He was a carpenter, he was a cabinet maker, he was a stonemason, and he was an absolutely fabulous violin maker. And I might mention that one of his miniature violins is on display up at the Erskine building, of which I brought a picture here, and tells the story of how that came about. Many buildings were built by my great-grandfather and the partnerships he had with Fred Schumer and Henry John Black and John Kammerer. And so we're going to talk about that today. He was born in Germany, and he came through Ellis Island in New York in 1881 and worked in the Pullman shops in Chicago until 1882. When he headed west, he met up with Henry Fruth, Mr. John Henry Black, and Mr. John Kammerer in Fort Pierre. And their friendship lasted for many years after they met. That year, 1882, they left for the Black Hills, loaded up what meager tools they had. Grandpa William had stonemason tools and carpenter tools, and they put all their tools in the back of an oxen train. And since the trains were so full, going west out to the Black Hills, they walked. They walked all the way to Piedmont and then on into Sturgis. Great-Grandpa William and Henry Fruth formed a partnership as contractors and builders in Sturgis. They built the first planing mill in town, a two-story building which became, years later, that many of us here probably remember, Sturgis Auto Company. The building stood for years and then later became Collinwood Auto Supply, and now it's right next to the bowling alley. And now it's the Total Eclipse or whatever the name of that salon is. My granddaughter works there. And now Grandpa and Henry operated the Black and Grams cabinet shop there, and Mr. Kammerer worked for them. Kammerer later became a rancher in the Piedmont area. I remember his son, Lefty Kammerer, good Republican like my dad. They built coffins. They built rough boxes and cabinets. William bought a building I know as Grams Sawmill in the mid-1880s. It was an old grist mill, and it was powered by steam. The first floor became a planer room, and then they built a dock for the log decks and for the head rig that many of us remember Grams Sawmill, where my dad and my Grandpa Harry sawed the rough lumber that they dry and later would bring it into the planing mill to plane it for smooth lumber. The second floor had all of the milling equipment, much of it handmade by Grandpa William, with overhead pulleys and mazes of belts to power everything. Today, all of this woodworking shop is out at the Western Dakota Antique Club. I remember when we were getting ready to take the sawmill down after my dad died, the Western Dakota Antique Club brought a big crew, and they measured and they took calculations and they took photographs before they took anything apart, and now it's on display out at the Antique Club. Grandpa and Henry dissolved their partnership after 18 years when Henry started to build the Fruth Hotel. That stood until 1977 when what is now First Interstate Bank. Grandpa married my great-grandma Emma Swanson in 1885. And Harry, one of the children, became my Grandpa Harry Grams as the second generation. Great-grandpa William formed a new partnership then with Fred Schumer in 1888. The partnership lasted for 18 years. They contracted to build the courthouse. St. Martin's Academy, just west of the courthouse, the Erskine School building, built in 1925, that my grandson Nicholas, Mackenzie's older brother, was about the last one to get to go to grade school there. So all the Gramses went to school at the Erskine building. Grandpa William contracted to build the county courthouse that some of us remember in 1894. If I get my 1894. Two of great-grandpa's homes still stand today. The two on Lozelle Street. One of them, the one not by Loftus Dental, that Junior, thank Terry for putting a coat of paint on it. Looks a hell of a lot better. But anyway, my dad was born in that one, and not in the white one, but I was raised in the white one. Dad told me Grandpa Henry Fruth and John Anderson, who later became sheriff of Meade County, left for the Klondike Gold Rush in 1898. Great-grandpa William told his foreman, and August Bauer, "You run the sawmill. I don't know when I'll be back." And he was going to the Klondike. Well, Grandpa William made it as far as Lake Bennett, and I did a little work on Google. Where would we be without Google? The winter of 1897 and 98, Lake Bennett was one of the largest tent cities in the world. It was the head of the lake. Over 7,000 watercraft of all sizes and shapes during an 18-hour period on May 29th and 30th, 1898, they were hauling people to the Klondike. And great-grandpa William, that's as far as he made it was Lake Bennett. He built boats. He built boats so people could go to the Klondike. But the wages in Sturgis to build the courthouse, which was contracted for $13,000, was $1 a day. Great-grandpa William, when he left for the Klondike and made it as far as Lake Bennett, worked for $25 a day. And that's why I guess I wouldn't blame him. That'd be kind of like today. You know, years ago, I think I worked for Wayne Baker for $3 or $4 an hour, if it was that, and McDonald's pays $15 or $20 an hour now. Back in Sturgis, a stonemason made $22.25 a day. A master carpenter made $1.50 a day, and a common laborer was paid $1 a day. The sawmill, I remember, is one of 3 that the Grams family operated. Great-grandpa had one in Piedmont. It was a bulb kerosene diesel until 1914. And then and then they moved up to Vanacker, and we happened to live on some of the land that Grandpa Harry and Grandpa William pulled logs off of. I remember Kitchen Springs, which we developed a number of years, that for the elk that we thought were going to be there to drink out of the tank. But then the Game and Fish drove them all out of the Snyder Ranch years ago, and they left Vinarker Canyon too. So I don't think anybody drinks out of that stock tank. But anyway, Lynn Hendrickson, my neighbor in the back of the room, has got the original rocks that I think Lynn, as far as I know, the head rig was there. Part of the sawmill was there for one of great grandpa's portable mills. The story that goes with that was years ago, all that land around the Galena turnoff was Graham's land. And then Doc Jones, Margie Jones, our vet, they have land that Doc got. And Harold Walker, Bruce Walker's dad, talked Grandpa Harry into selling him some land, or maybe it was Grandpa William, the story goes. So they had 20 acres, and the Hendrickson cabin that was on a half-acre plot, Lynn's dad, Mel Hendrickson, that we remember from high school days, Mel talked Grandpa Harry into selling him a half acre. Should I tell the story? Well, Grandpa Harry, on occasion, would drink a little Old Crow. And so I guess Mel must have thought that would help. And so they staggered around and put little sticks or something and eventually got it surveyed for a half acre of land, which just happened to be right in the center of Harold Walker's skeet range. And so that didn't sit very well with the Walkers. But anyway, Lynn is still there. The cabin Mel and Lyle and Lynn put together is still there. He's a damn good neighbor. I remember spending time with my Uncle Harry up in Vinarker Canyon because in the old days, they had draft horses, big Belgians with huge hoofs. And I'd go up with Uncle Harry on the weekend and he'd pack a lunch or my mother would pack a lunch, happy to get rid of me for a few hours. And we'd go up there and feed the horses and I'd walk them and Uncle Harry would hook up the horses and skid some logs. And I remember once one of those horses put his hoof on my Converse tennis shoe. And Harry heard me screaming. I thought I was going to die, and he just whacked the horse's leg and lifted up. So I survived that. Linda and I built a home up in Vinarker on that very land about 20, going on 21 years ago. In later years, my great-grandpa William stayed busy serving on the school board, cabinet work, and making violins. Grandpa presented one of his violins to President Coolidge in 1927 when he made Custer Game Lodge his summer White House. And that violin is on display at the Smithsonian today. Years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, we went to Washington, D.C. and purposely went to the Smithsonian to see that violin. And wouldn't you know it, it was closed for remodeling. My brother Bill, who's the musical one of the bunch, of the two of us, got one other violin. And the story goes like this, and the little miniature one is on display up at Erskine. My great uncle Lane, who was born in 1910, was slave riding with my dad on what is now Paisley Terrace, Weber's Hill. Well, the REA had come to town back then, and as he was sleigh riding down the hill, he hit one of the poles, and he died there in my father's arms. And Lane was 10 years old, so Dad was a couple, 3 years older. And so Grandpa William cut down that pole and made violins out of it. And my brother, who's the musical one, has one of those violins with a beautiful display case to go with it, because Dad thought he should have it since he's the musical one, you know. And so Brother Bill got that, and he's going to donate it and bring it out of here maybe this next summer, and maybe put it on display up at the courthouse at the Erskine building along with the miniature one that's there now. Grandpa continued running the sawmill because I remember Grandpa Harry as a sawyer. He was a contractor and a sawyer, supplying pine lumber to ranchers and carpenters throughout the hills. Harry and my grandma Edna had 7 children. My dad, William, Harry, Aunt Ree, Claire, Lane, and Neil, and my Aunt Barbara. My Uncle Neil and Aunt Ree lived in California and Spearfish, respectively. My Uncle Claire died in the war. He was shot down. He was in the Army Air Corps and shot down over New Guinea. And I remember Dad told the story that the Pygmies repatriated him and got him back home. So, and he's buried up at the Bear Butte Cemetery along with my grandparents. I don't remember my Grandpa Harry very well. He died in 1955. But I do remember the cabin that Grandpa William and Harry built up at Dead Man, because we go up there on weekends and special occasions, and Grandpa Harry would open the drawer in the living room part, and here were these big boxes of Hershey bars, you know, and they were a nickel back then, if they were that much bigger, and we each got one. So the only reason we'd go up there, because, you know, oh, big deal, go in the cabin, you know, but we got those Hershey bars. But Grandpa died in 55. And Grandma Edna was a wonderful and excellent flower person and a cat lover. Dad told me the story about when they lived on Lozelle in the big White House beside Loftus Dental now. Grandma Edna had a love for cats, 20, 30, 40 cats, until Grandma Edna went somewhere. Dad didn't tell the whole story, but she was gone. And while she was gone, Dad and Uncle Harry got rid of the cats. And when she came home, she was mad as hell because all the cats were gone. Uncle Harry, he died in the plane crash. I told you about that. But Grandma had a green thumb. But Dad and my Uncle Harry both continued the Gramps tradition after return from the war. Dad, Harry, Neil, Ree, Claire, they all served, all in the Army. I remember Dad saying the first thing he did when he got back in Sturgis after the war in 1945 was to sell the old steam engines at the lumberyard, and they converted to what they called then 3-phase electric power that ran the sawmill. Dad said much of the equipment for the sawmill in Sturgis came from an old homestake sawmill up at Estes. My dad always said old sawmills don't wear out, just the operators. Dad and Uncle Harry remained partners in the sawmill until '69 when Dad purchased his share of the business. Uncle Harry, as did my Grandpa Harry, enjoyed Old Crow. And as I can remember, because Mother would write letters to me when I was in Vietnam in '69, and remember, everybody here remembers counter checks from the Bear Butte Valley Bank. Every business had counter checks. I used them when I came back from Vietnam. Well, Uncle Harry used them for a little treat up at the liquor store. And the lumberyard banked at Bear Butte Valley Bank, Harold Walker, who gave me my first loan when I was 10 years old, because I let my bicycle get trashed, and he said, I'm not going to buy you another bike, but you can go see Mr. Walker. So in that old bank down there on the corner, I had to go there and get a tongue lashing from Harold because I needed to borrow $60 to buy a new bike. And Harold preached to me and said, you're going to be here every week until that's paid off. And so I got a paper route, and I paid him off on time. Dad continued working at our lumberyard, involved in city, county, and state politics, notable for his 14 years as a legislature. I got pictures over here of Grandpa William, Grandpa Harry, my dad in his younger days, probably graduated from high school, Dad in his work clothes, and then over here, a picture of my dad when he was sitting in the Senate at Pier. I remember people would come to the lumberyard when I worked there And Dad would be grizzly and unshaven and have soot all over his face and sawdust and that old hat that, and people would say, I like to see Senator Graham's. And I'd point, no, I want to see Senator Graham's. But he did clean up because Mother always had him clean up when he got ready to go to Pier for session. Dad loved to play the country bumpkin. But everyone who came to his appropriations committee in Pier knew him as an extremely intelligent, capable, articulate politician who could manage the state budget any better than anyone. He retired from the Sawmill in the legislature in 1980, was elected county commissioner for the second time. I remember he and Mom would play cribbage and Dad would go fishing at Spearfish Canyon, work in his garden, or do wood projects in the old shop. He made gavels. I should have brought one of his gavels. He made a gavel on a wood lathe that was upstairs. That didn't get donated to the Western Dakota Antique. I think my brothers got it. Dad's humor was evident when Dad, while he was in Pier, started the restoration of our state capitol. He was on appropriations when they appropriated the first money to take out the hundreds of air conditioners and all the windows in the Capitol and put in new windows and clean the place up and clean the murals. And over the years, it cost millions of dollars. And now we have one of the most beautiful state capitals in the nation. It's built as a miniature of the state of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. But Dad went in the basement one day and he found all kinds of retired bonds. And so that frame is there was made by my dad. He was like my great grandfather, pretty handy with a saw and a hammer. And for Christmas, we found these under the tree wrapped up in brown paper. And Dad never gave either one of us a gift. If Mother wouldn't have bought us something for Christmas, we wouldn't have anything under the tree. But that year, he gave us each one of those in brown paper. Well, Brother Bill got a retired bond from the South Dakota School of Mines because that's where he graduated from. And if you walk up here when we're done here and look at that one, my bond was a retired bond from the School for the Deaf and Dumb. I bet you're wondering why I brought that.
I brought the one I have because I have the one from the Plankington State Training School.
See, he did have a sense of humor. Well, one other quick story. Brother Bill, when Dad got back from the war, in the old days, if you were an officer, you could keep your handgun. Well, Dad brought two .45 automatics back from the war. One was a pearl-handled, chrome-plated .45 automatic, and the other one was just your standard issue Army .45. Brother Bill got the fancy one, and I got the standard issue one, where I kept for many years. And just recently, I gave it to my son, who lives in Arkansas now. And Dad had a friendship with a fellow by the name of Hollis Kirkendall. And Hollis had a little issue with Old Crow like my Grandpa Harry did. And they got to visiting one day, and Hollis said, I have an old Cavalry Sharps rifle that I'd like to trade you for that .45. Well, Brother Bill didn't even know that Dad traded off the .45 that he'd given him anyway. So Dad got a Cavalry Sharps rifle with a bent barrel and a broken stock. And I think it's still in our gun vault. I remember when Dad passed away in '83, a lot of people went to his funeral. And one of Dad's former workers, of which I've got some right here, Randy Ehlers, worked for my dad. One winter day with a whole bunch of snow on the roof of that building, it kind of faced east. And Randy, I don't remember, were we just loading the dump truck or something?
No, it was after blizzard. You were inside the second floor with the 2x4 beating on the.
Oh, and
I was down below.
Randy got buried in snow. But look at him, he survived. Dad's smile was evident when even to the end. He was starting to leave with it. His health was leaving him now because my dad came down with cancer. Cut his finger at the lumberyard, working, making frames, doing what he loved to do, and it never healed. And one of the old, I don't know the name of the person, but he wrote an article about Dad when Dad died. And I think we still have it. Bill Graham's was a rough piece of sandpaper on the outside, yet a kind and courteous statesman on the inside, and sometimes a cranky teddy bear. The same fellow worked for my Grandpa Harry as a child, and while Dad was gone to the war. He became a writer and later wrote in Dad's passing in '83. He said, he was something. He was the whole team and a dog under the wagon. Dad had a big heart and he loved our state. And I continued to run that lumberyard until finally it was time to close it down in the mid-'80s. Ranchers were going broke. They couldn't pay their bills, and we worried we wouldn't be able to pay our bills either. So that place is gone. The Massaberry Clinic is there, and now it's whatever it is now. And I don't know for sure, but since I still cut trees up on our land of Monacher, I think I still have a little sawdust in my pockets. I'm sure Linda notices that every time I have to take my clothes off in the garage because she won't let me in. And if the sawdust is in my clothes, I know it's in my soul. With that, I'll leave it open for questions. And Roger wants to give a display here, and I may talk to some of the things as they come up. Are you ready? I mean, Richard? I don't know why I call him Roger. I won't call him late for dinner.
Is it true that your dad kept the chair, the old chair from the,
that?
when they replaced the chairs, your dad said they weren't needed, so he kept the old one? When we used to take students down there, your dad always had the old chair on the floor of the.
We have the chair.
Okay, I wondered if you guys kept the chair.
And you'll see some pictures in here that was the, we have the, I don't know if we have the one that was for the lumberyard, the old one, but we have his Senate chair that he sat in,
Yeah.
in the
The
Capitol.
kids always noticed that your dad's chair was the only old one on the floor.
Yeah. Years ago, that made my dad mad because they modernized and got rid of all the Senate and House chamber chairs and went with new modern kind, except for Dad's.
He didn't need it, he said, I guess.
That's a picture of this. My mother put whatever plastic on it. Yeah, decoupage. And Mother wrote on the back, taken from the Sturgis newspaper in 1904. So, my grandson just came in, Ethan. You're fashionably late. Richard, are you ready? There's Grandpa William, and this is my great Uncle Lane. And that's great Grandpa William with one of his violins. I'll tell you a quick little story. Go back one, Richard. Is that going to be a lot of work? No. 1955, Grandma Edna couldn't live in the house on Lozelle, the big white house that right next to Loftus. So Mom and Dad had a house up in Comanche Court, so we traded. I spent my years growing up in Sturgis at the big white house down in Lozelle, and Grandma Edna lived in the house in Comanche Court. Well, other than Claire, who died during the war, when Grandma Edna passed away, the Grahamses were pretty stubborn. Must have been some Irish in them. But they had a big fight, and Uncle Lane was there. He was a NASA engineer, worked on the space shuttle program for years. Well, his son Lane we weren't that old then. What? Uncle Neil, yeah, yeah. Another reason why my wife is here. But Uncle Neil, they had a big fight, and my Aunt Ree walked away, my dad walked away, Uncle Harry walked away, and Aunt Barbara, and they all walked away, and Uncle Neil rented the biggest U-Haul truck that he could. He loaded up every piece of paper, every picture, everything out of that house, and took it to California, never to be seen again. And my Uncle Neil outlived his children. They all died before my Uncle Neil, and to this day, the only recollection we have of my great-grandpa William is a lot of what you're seeing right now, other than my father, before Dad passed away, Grandpa William made so many tools that he used to make violins or to do cabinet work. Well, Dad, a good carpenter as he was, he built boxes, and I have them in my shop. They're about 4 feet long by about 2 feet wide by about 2 feet deep, with nice lids on them, completely filled with all the great Grandpa Williams, mostly handmade tools. And we still have them. So, and I should go through them, and I don't know, I don't think my son wants them. And I know we can't get young people today to be involved in a lot of things that are old. Mother saved de Havilland China, and Ryan got Fiesta ware. They're not interested in that stuff, you know. But anyway, that tells you a little bit of story about William. So I've got a lot of it here now that we have, and a lot of it is recollection from my dad. Okay, Richard. Richard found some old clippings from 1891. Evidently, the house, the building that became Collingwood Auto, and later is now where my granddaughter works as a hairdresser. Is that the right word? Yeah. Anyway, well, I think it must have burned down at least once, because that's where Henry Black and Grandpa built their first planing mill and cabinet shop, and so that might have been the fire. Richard and I talked about it. We really don't know, but evidently it was only $2,000. But you know, when labor is $1 an hour a day, and so things didn't cost as much. And that's a little article that Richard found. Well, rumor has it we did have KKK in Sturgis, according to Charlie Rambo. And so I really don't know whether, Dad never mentioned it, so I don't, and I haven't found any white capes or anything in anything, so I don't know whether my Grandpa William was involved in that. But anyway, that's my great Uncle Carl. And that's probably taken in the upstairs of the lumberyard that we all remember, where all the millwork was, where they built. Back in those days, the late 1800s, early 1900s, everything was built, except everything was built, the sashes, the door frames, the sashes for windows, everything was built by hand and with whatever equipment Grandpa William put together. And so, and that's why it's out at the Western Dakota Antique Club. So we needed to have something to help remember the lumberyard by. And that's Dad in his old roll top desk. And that's how he looked most of the time. That was the rough side of my dad, the sandpaper side of my dad. We have the roll top desk. Dad told me that that roll top came in on an oxen wagon train for anybody ever hear of the Scholard Hotel? And I don't know whether it came in for the Scholard Hotel and Grandpa William got it somehow, or the Fruth Hotel that Henry Fruth built that they tore down in 1977. But we restored the old roll top desk, and it's at our house. There's a nail that held the roll top up because it kept falling on Dad's hands, and because they did all his paperwork and bookwork in there, so just put a damn nail in it. You know, well, the nail isn't there anymore, but the hole is still there. you know. But anyway, that's Dad, and this is the head rig, and I tailed the saw just right behind there where the logs got changed into cants like they are there. And that was the 52-inch circular saw blade that would cut through the wood. And then all that rough lumber was dried, just air dried, stacked. Brother Bill and I stacked many aboard. And then when it dried, unless we were selling it to farmers and ranchers, or Grandpa Harry was, went through the planing mill and Dad planed it down. And that's a picture of the sawmill. That's looking south. And if you go on the other side of the sawmill, that's where Main Street is, and the Vets Club is a little bit to the left. And everybody remember Napa Auto on the corner there? Yeah, Dad would send me over there all the time to get parts when something would break. That's taken in 1970.
So for us newbies who haven't been here very long, that mill was where the Massillary Clinic.
Yeah, that's the footprint. Yep. That's
where the parking lot is.
Yeah, that's where the parking lot is now. Yep. That's just another picture. That's looking north. And the ranchers would come in and a conveyor would take the sawdust up from the mill and it'd go into the big dump there, and then ranchers come in and they take the sawdust and use it for bedding for their cattle, or if they're hauling cattle to sales or something. For many years, plus the planer, we had the planer, and it would go, the shavings would go up there too, and a lot of people would take the shavings for their chickens, you know, and so now you buy the cubes or whatever of shavings for the chickens. But those are just some pictures taken later on, and the metal shed, we'll go back. Metal shed back there. That's right, the other side of that shed was Main Street. And the Vets Club is just a little to the left. Okay, Richard. This is the house my dad was born in. That house is still there. In fact, Dr. Stewart and his wife bought that. It didn't look quite like this, and then Larry Burdett owned it later on. And Larry called me years ago and had a piece of stained glass that came out of the original house, and so we have that. And always thought might put it into something, but we haven't yet. But great-grandpa built that house, and that's kind of what it looks like today, or a little more modern picture after the Stewarts fixed it up. But just like the house that Junior Terry still has that house, right? Okay, well, all the woodwork in the house is made at the lumberyard. And in fact, the house where I was raised, the millwork was varnished with varnished great-grandpa William, made from scratch. And then I haven't been in the house. Does it still look the same inside, Junior?
Kind of has a 70s look to it inside, yeah. But that woodwork's still there.
Yeah. But anyway, so we still have the two houses, and this one is in the magazine or the calendar that's up front here that showed some of the old historical homes in Sturgis. So that's just a picture of then and now. And that's me back in the 80s when we built an addition over on the north side of Lozelle for what people remember as H. Grams and Sons.
So which one's you?
What's that?
Which one was you?
That one.
That one. No, wait a minute. That one. No? Well, that looks like me. I look better then.
Wasn't supposed to be a trick question.
That's when we expanded. Yeah. Richard dug all this up out of articles that the library has here. And had we known back then in the 80s that just a few months after we closed the lumberyard, Key City Building and Lampert's would both close, we would, I think we might have found a way to stay open. Because Spearfish, even though they're 30 more miles or 25 miles farther away from Rapid, Spearfish has 3 lumberyards. and they all do very well. So, okay. That's just a picture that's on. Oh, wrong one. This one. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, that's the lumberyard. Grandpa William, Grandpa Harry. Gosh, I look good with that mustache. My dad and my Uncle Harry. Yeah. Is that about all of them, Richard? Oh, yeah. And then Richard thought we'd put in there the billboard, the deal for the auction, when we had the auction. And that's a rancher that lived in town, not very far from the lumberyard. He tore the building down and saved a lot of the lumber. And, but as I told you, part of that mill was there because it was a grist mill when great grandpa bought it. That was in the early 1800s. I don't think he'd been here very long, but you know, when we did our 100th, we based it on 1883, and Grandpa came out in 1882. But actually, he and Henry Black started where the Collingwood Auto and Mackenzie's hair salon is now. But Grandpa William bought the building, but I don't think they moved the planing mill and the sawmill there right away. So I might have fudged a few years, and but. Hell, what's 10 or 20 years in the big picture? But anyway, that's my dad. Yeah, that's how I remember him. And a tourist took that picture and came back sometime later and gave it to Dad, and we had copies of it made, and he was something special. My brother lives in Kennewick, Washington. He's a retired mining and mechanical engineer, part-time Baptist minister, musician, very talented, and he should be the one up here talking because that boy don't shut up. He can talk about anything, you know. In fact, even if he's not an expert, he can talk about anything because he's an engineer and he can fix it. And if it's not broke, he'll fix it. That all of them, Richard? Oh, there. That's the roll top desk. Stubby was my Uncle Harry's dog, who spent more time with us than he did with Uncle Harry. And he always lived under the roll top desk. And Dad would always have to kick him out of the way because his chair was there and Dad did his book work. If anybody remembers going into the old lumberyard in the wintertime, had the old stove there and Calvin Hoxie. I'm sure some people, I know Randy, maybe Junior remembers Hoxie, you know. Well, anyway, you'd open that door to check on the fire and the smoke would just roll out. And at one time, the ceiling was sheetrock, but you couldn't tell. It was solid black. And it wasn't painted. It was soot, you know, but that's the way it was. And now we have that in our house. That's a classic, yep. And all the papers in there, I'm sure Dad had a home for everything because it was in a slot. So nothing was changed when we had it refinished, other than we fixed the roll top so it actually works and took the nail out.
We had to have a door remade.
Oh,
Remember, there was the former mayor of Rapid City did refinishing stuff.
Keith Carlisle?
Yeah, and so we took it to him and he rebuilt one of the door.
I think he became mayor later on in Rapid.
After he retired, though,
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah, he refinished furniture and he did a wonderful job.
Where is the hole that the nail was? I mean.
Oh, it was right up in the corner, right up there. Still there.
So, but it isn't like glaring.
Oh, no, it wasn't that big. It was probably about a number 6 or a number 8 nail, you know, if you understand. About that long, you know. I'm sure Dad just got annoyed one day because it kept coming down, that he just took a hammer and put a nail in it, you know. That's the way he was. And for a lot of you, I think Dr. Tom remembers, that was Dad. He died a month after that picture was taken, but he and Joe Ham, he was my doctor, brought me into the world. And there's my dad when they started the program for Tom, where you at? I can't remember for sure, but the legislature helped fund that to get more doctors. Was that for, mainly for West River? You remember that? Yeah, the West River Medical School. Yeah, and so, and the article tells a little bit about it, and that's taken out at Fort Meade. And I remember Fred Grimspoe. And that's Grandpa William. And as far as I know, that's Lane. And maybe. Linda, help me out.
I think,
Would that be,
I think that's your Aunt Ree.
might be Aunt Ree.
Oh, shoot.
My Aunt Ree was married to my Uncle Bob Wood, the dentist in town.
I think that's your Aunt Ree.
Yeah.
That might be Neil.
And that could be my Uncle Neil, yeah. But anyway, there's Grandpa Harry. That's how I remember my Grandpa Harry. Yeah, big belly, big broad shoulders, kind of like a lumberyard man, unlike the guy in the top picture with the shaggy mustache. Yeah. And that's that Dad when we laid him to rest out at National. Yeah. There's Wild Bill Janklow. Yeah. Yeah. Dad got mad at him quite a lot, but like everybody else did. Yeah. He kept his reputation up till the end. Yeah. And right over here by my grandson Ethan is one of the original light posts from Main Street that was gas. And every night they'd go around and light them. And Grandpa Harry, or else my dad, converted it to electricity, and that was in the backyard of my folks' house where I grew up, the White House. And so all these years I've kept it. And Richard asked me the other day, and oh, it's up on a shelf, it's dusty, I'm not going to bring it. Well, there it is. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I would presume whoever did that worked for the city back then, and his job was to light those every night.
I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. On behalf of the Sturgis Area Arts Council, thank you very much, Bob, for putting this together, and Linda. I thank you. We do record and tape all of these, and they are available on YouTube at a later date, as soon as Richard has time to edit them and get them put on there. So because of that, I know that everybody has a Graham's story, and I've got one. As a rancher in the area, and I was always into Graham's Sawmill buying something. And back in those days, I chewed. Well, you never wanted to walk into the office and get your chew out if the senator was sitting there because, oh, let me have a little bit of that. Well, if you had a full can, you did not have a full can when he got into it. At least 3 fingers, at least a half a can every time. I mean, it was just incredible what he could shove into his mouth. Incredible what came out of it sometimes too. So, but we do record these, so if you have comments or questions, please raise your hand. I want to get Mike over to you so that we can get a good recording of it.
I might add that I'm the 13th son of the Krauser family, and we have some of the Krauser members here, and Lyle and Lynn, the 2 twins, both chewed Copenhagen, and then they'd sometimes stop at the lumberyard on the way back from school, and the old man would see that deal in their back pocket, and he'd say, "You got to chew," and there'd be nothing left. And and I know the twins were on a pretty tight budget. I don't know how much Copenhagen cost back then, but they learned pretty quick that they didn't show off their Copenhagen when they came to visit at the lumberyard. God, I can't believe I talked about everything.
I don't know if you remember my dad, John Dom, but he worked at the lumber yard. And I still have a picture of 4 guys, I can't remember who they are, that worked there. And it must have been, I was just a little kid, and my older sister tells me that when we came from school, that we would stop there and play in that sawdust pile.
Oh,
I don't remember it, but she does. She's 2 years older than me and is always telling me that I just don't remember because I'm so much younger than her. But but anyway, she was telling me stories, yeah. But he worked at, I don't remember just when he quit, but it had to be probably in the 40s, I suppose. I don't know. Because I was born in 37, so,
yeah.
and I was old enough to be in school, not very far into
That
school,
would be
probably.
Grandpa Harry.
Yeah.
That'd be my Grandpa Harry. Yep. Yep.
And I think he run the saw.
I don't see Bud Cop here. Bud's not here, is he? Bud worked for my dad for many years, and Bud helps us out at the food pantry. And Randy Ehlers, of course, and George Malin. A lot of people probably remember George Malin. And and my brother worked there for many years as well. And but I think back then, of course, things didn't cost so much. Dad would give me a $5 bill and tell me to go down to Dodson's grocery, and you could buy a 10-pack of Copenhagen for less than $5. And Dad always told me I could keep the change. So anybody remember Dodson's grocery? Down going, well, I could get a pop, I could get penny candy. I was wealthy with what was left over. But then again, to go to theater, Mother would give me 50 cents on a weekend, and you had money to go to the show and get a frozen pop and popcorn with a nickel left over to go to Carl's Confectionery. Yeah.
Also, you were talking about the Fruth Hotel when it was burnt, when it tore down. At that time, my dad was working at the cemetery, and he's got a picture where he was burying this Fruth Hotel at the cemetery, because at the back of the cemetery there was a big draw, and they had to fill it up before they could make graves there, and that's where the cemetery, or that's where the Fruth Hotel was.
That's a fitting place for it.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any old stories? Oh, there's one. Tammy's got one.
My name is Tammy Krauser Hatzenbiller, and behind every great man is a great woman. So there was Jerry Grams, and of course, she never had any daughters. So Kathy Doring, who is Kathy Doring Anderson, we got to go to the big White House on Lozelle Street, and we got to have tea parties all the time because she sure enjoyed having 2 little girls. And yes, Bob was my brother, the 13th of our family.
Hi, I'm Janine Walker. My father was Bruce Walker, and he grew up at Graham's Sawmill. I remember him telling stories of working there when he was like 10. And I remember going there when I was a little girl, too. So it brings back lots of memories. Thanks for a great presentation. But one of my favorite Grandpa Graham stories is that his wife made him go out to the outhouse to get Limburger cheese because she wouldn't let him keep it inside. So he had to go out to the outhouse to get a piece of Limburger cheese. And as a little kid, I'm like, huh? But when you got older and you smelled Limburger cheese, you understood her reasoning, right? And I could go on and on about stories. And then Uncle Harry used to bring my dad mushrooms. And Uncle Harry used Copenhagen too, but he actually used it as snuff up his nose, which was really a sight to see. And so my sisters and I would be home, and they're like 5 and 6 years older than me. But here would come Harry with 2 buckets of mushrooms and kind of maybe 3 sheets to the wind, maybe. And so we would say, Harry, where do you get these? And excuse my language, we go, I get them at the shit pile out of the sail ring. Where do you think I get them? And so as little kids, you were never going to eat a mushroom. But my dad peeled them and cooked them, and they loved them. But I'm like, okay. And now that I'm older, I get it. All right, thanks.
Bruce was a very dear friend of my dad, and Bruce was another one of those quadruple Copenhagen dippers. So when he and Dad would grab a Copenhagen can, it was mostly gone after they both helped themselves.
Anybody else?
I have I have a dear friend that's in the back of the room, Duke Doring. I grew up with my best friend Herbie and Duke and Chuck over on Dudley Street, just a whole block to the north, where we played baseball for years growing up. And that house is still almost original over there where Herb and Isa lived for many years. And Duke just recently retired from Camp Rapid. He was the historian for the South Dakota Army Guard for many years, and he still shares stories about guardsmen. And Duke was the one that probably saved me. When I came back from Vietnam and got out of the Army finally, I was going to college at Black Hills, and Duke talked me into joining the National Guard. And I was so fed up with the Army after Vietnam, I didn't want to have anything to do with the Army, but Duke had a better path for me. And 34 years, 11 months, and 29 days later, I retired. And Duke had a lot to do with that.
As a full colonel.
Well, thank both of you for your service. That's great. Thank you.
Like my mother used to say, when I'd say I'm done at the kitchen table, Mother always said, turkeys are done, people are finished.
I had the opportunity to probably spend a couple hours with Bob, and a couple of things I wanted to mention that you forgot. Tell the counter check story. You didn't finish the counter check story.
Janine's dad was after Harold died, and I got my introduction to Harold back when I was 10 years old, borrowing money. When I got back from Vietnam, as I said, counter checks were in every business, and I'd write them. And finally, Bruce wrote me a letter. But in the old days, in the 70s, the banks would usually cover your overdrafts if they knew you. So Bruce wrote me a letter, and Janine's dad had beautiful handwriting. If anybody could write cursive and read it, Bruce Walker was damn good. He wrote me a letter. Bobby, just because you have check blanks doesn't mean you have money. That was the end of the overdrafts.
The other thing is you were going to talk about the patents.
About what?
The patents. The patents.
Oh, yeah. I'll just Great-Grandpa William was quite an inventor. And this one is from 1926. And Great-Grandpa patented beehives. And 1926, and Dad, somehow, everything didn't end up at Grandma Edna's to where it went away to California and never came back. And then Great-Grandpa also patented in 1894, he called it the spirit level. And there's a picture of it over here that you can look after we're done here. And I would presume there might have been others that Great-Grandpa made and tried to get patent, and we live in our hustle world nowadays, and we don't have time, but somehow my great-grandpa, on top of contracting buildings, he built buildings out at Fort Meade, barracks for the cavalry. He built some of the buildings on Main Street that are still standing, the Erskine building, the old courthouse, and somehow he had time to do things like this. And of course, he didn't have a smartphone. And he couldn't Google like I could Google to find out a little bit about Lake Bennett, but nowadays we can't live without our smartphone. I still have a flip phone. Well, my wife knows I have a flip phone because I drop it so damn many times the smartphone wouldn't last long. But anyway, yeah, it was a kinder time back then for my Grandpa William. I wished I would have got to know him, because he would have been a class act to bring here and talk to this group if we could grab him and bring him back, but it's a different world we live in now. Too fast paced.
Any other?
There's got to be more stories in here.
Yeah.
I know that lady.
I'm Carla Alexander. I'm Carl Bartlett's granddaughter. And so if you were familiar with Bartlett Machinery, it was right across the from the post office where there's an empty lot now. And so it was a half a block from Graham's Sawmill. And my grandpa let us do anything we wanted to when he was babysitting. We could run the town, but there were two places we couldn't go. Graham's Sawmill, because it was dangerous, and the Vets Club, because kids weren't allowed in there. So we would stand at the corner and look across the sawmill. So when I heard the story about playing in the sawdust, I want to know how you got away with it. Because we would stand on the corner and look across and all that stuff for kids to play in. And we couldn't play in an ounce of it. We had to stay on the corner. One other story, Senator Grams used to come down and visit my grandpa quite a bit when we were around. And it was always business, and they did their business first. But then Senator Grams would sit around and chew, which my grandpa didn't do, so he didn't get a supply there. But they would just sit there and talk. And when people talk about being a teddy bear, Senator Grams was so awesome when I was a little girl. Once in a while, I'd crawl on the wrong adult. So I'd go in to see Grandpa, and I'd crawl on a lap. And I'd look up, and it was Senator Grams. He was very cuddly when he wanted to be. I just wanted to redeem his reputation.
The sawmill, in my earlier experiences working at the mill, have big log decks, and when we weren't actually working for Dad, they had these sticks that we used to strip each lumber stack and then get air in there so they could dry. Well, we would dig underground tunnels like the Hamas is doing in Gaza City, and we'd build forts underground, but the problem is it was mostly sawdust, foots and foots of old rotten sawdust. Well, one day the jammer that Dad used to stack the logs a little higher, it caved in one of our tunnels. And the old man was madder than hell because they had to get the bulldozer, the D4 cat fired up to pull it out of the trench that we built. And that was the end of our forts. Anything else I forget, Richard?
Bob, I remember going to the sawmill, and your dad would hold court with college presidents.
Yes, he did.
Would you like to relate?
They're the ones who would say,
Yeah.
Where's the senator?
Yeah, and because your dad sitting on the Senate Appropriations Committee was very influential in the monies that were siphoned or given to universities. And so it wasn't unusual to walk into the sawmill and see the president of Black Hills State College or School of Mines sitting next to the desk and talking to Harry about an appropriation.
I remember Brigadier General Harvey Fraser, retired Army, that ended up being president of School of Mines. He never knocked. Early in the morning, he'd be on his way someplace. He'd come in, he'd open the front door, yelling, Jerry, my mom, and Mother might still be in her nightgown having coffee out in the kitchen. And here's Harvey Fraser coming in to talk to Dad about some appropriation he wanted Dad to approve so the School of Mines to get some money. And that was just I don't know if there's any old School of Mines graduates here, but Harvey was a real pill. But he was a good friend of Dad's, and if anybody was in favor of supporting our state-supported colleges, it was my dad, along with, but years ago, George Malin worked for Dad, and Dad was starting the D4 Cat that had a pony engine on it. And a pony engine on older diesel tractors was a gas engine they used to start, and then it would turn over the diesel engine until it fired up. Well, Dad always wore, like I did too, loose cotton gloves in the winter. Well, it had a V-belt on it, like a fan belt, and Dad reached in for something, and the V-belt caught his glove and jerked the glove in along with his finger, and Dad jerked back. Well, it ripped off the end of his little finger. And Dad spent quite a lot of time out at Fort Meade after healing up after it, because when you lose a finger and it's pulled off, it takes all your tendons and bones and makes a mess. Well, Dad, when he was in Pier, he would hold his gavel that he would make. He'd turn it upside down. It was like a pistol. And that one finger would jut way off. And And if somebody asked for money, a college president, and he was done listening to him, he'd just give him the signal with his little pistol. You're done, get out of here. And I have one of those gavels. Dad used to make them and give them away to people. So if you have one, they're an antique. Is our hour up? No, I'm done. I'm finished. I do want to thank Richard one more time. Give him a hand.
No, thank you. As a little token of thanks, we always last time I did a really nice fancy card, and I've been moving the last 4 weeks. So here's a gift card for you, but without the fancy card. So I'm sure it spends all the same.
Not necessary.
Well, we appreciate everybody that is willing to do these programs, and because we couldn't do it without people stepping forward and doing this. So I would like to mention there is another program that kind of connects to this. Judge Eckridge and Kevin Forrester did a program on the old courthouse several years ago, and I'd encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and check that out, because there's actually an article in there written by probably your grandpa, because he's the one that built it, right? And he talks about building the courthouse, and initially why it was even tore down. So
one thing I forgot is my dad, who was the county commissioner a couple times for Meade County, they had to put a new roof on the old courthouse in 1954. It cost $5,000 to put a roof on the courthouse in 1954. And great grandpa built the courthouse for $13,000.
So that's all I got.
This is here until Richard says I have to haul it out of here. So if you want to come and look at some of the things and look at the patents, feel free.
Yeah, these patents are pretty fascinating. I was looking at them, and I did a little bit of architecture and stuff in high school, and you wouldn't know that wasn't done with a computer. It isn't,
Take a look at these. You'll notice that the lines are just meticulously straight,
it's
and you wonder
very
how
meticulous.
Grandpa did that, because there was no ARC or whatever, all the computer programs that the architects and draftsmen use today, all done by hand.
They're pretty fascinating.